This fact is also verified by history. Adolf Hitler, with his Nazi party, came to power in 1939 in Germany. The fact that Hitler conquered so many places in Europe and for a time seemed almost to win the war did indeed dash Europe to pieces. So the name "he that dasheth in pieces" fits him perfectly. In other words, again, Hitler has to be the man the Scriptures entitle the "he that dasheth in pieces." Now let us look at another point, a very important point, and that's found in Nahum chapter 2, verse 5. Remember, we're speaking about proving that Nahum was talking about World War II and, of course, the continuation of World War II. Verse 5 of Nahum chapter 2 says, "He shall recount his worthies, they shall stumble in their walk, they shall make haste to the wall thereof, and the defense shall be prepared." This person who recounts his worthies, or that is, recounts his generals, would have to be the "he that dashes in pieces," and it fits Hitler perfectly, because this is precisely what happened to his army while fighting with Russia and Great Britain at the same time. There's a beautiful explanation of this in Timely Greetings, Volume 1, Number 3, page 16. It says, "To recount his worthies implies that the number of worthies, or captains and generals, and the other mighty men along with his fine army is diminishing, and hence the need of recounting, and that his worthies are to stumble in their walk. That is, they are to make some kind of blunder on their march to victory and cause them to fall." And this is exactly what happened. Hitler's army stumbled by waging war against Russia while he was in war with Great Britain. That critical moment of his career was Hitler's greatest folly. England was just about to give up, but the German army pulled away and went to fight Russia. And, too, the fall of his worthies being mentioned before the fall of Assyria is mentioned, the prophecy thus reveals that he that dasheth in pieces, Hitler, was to fall first. Isn't that beautiful? That's exactly what happened historically. And so you see then definitely Nahum is talking about World War II. So then Hitler was to make a mistake on his march to victory. He was to fall. But later Assyria is going to fall. And history tells us, by the way, that indeed England was about to give up. Some historians would tell us that England had sent an envoy, someone, in other words, to negotiate with Germany a possible surrender. And at that very moment when that was happening, Hitler retreated and went to Russia. As a result, he lost the battle there. Part of the reason was that as he was approaching just perhaps as close as 20 to 25 miles away from Moscow, the capital of Russia, his army gave out. It was too cold, and they started to lose their men, and as a result they had to retreat. And that was the beginning of the downfall of the Nazi army. And as a result, eventually, Hitler had to surrender. So Hitler fell first, according to Nahum, and that is precisely what happened in history. So it is clear that Nahum definitely prophesied about the events of World War II. But as we said earlier, Nahum does not stop with World War II. His message is really about the fall of Assyria. So why does God use World War II as the background for the fall of Assyria when she actually does not fall until later? Well, here's why. Listen to these inspired statements now, found again from Timely Greetings, Volume 1, Number 24. Timely Greetings, Volume 1, Number 24, pages 14 and 17. It is plain to see that the one who dashes in pieces and who comes before Assyria's face is the one who forces Assyria to prepare to militarize herself mightily. Her forced military preparations, agitated by him that dashes in pieces, starts Assyria on her downfall. So World War II prepared the way for the downfall of Assyria. what happened with the conflict between Hitler and the West was the beginning, or it started Assyria on her downfall. That was page 14. Now page 17 says this: in this day, he that dashes in pieces wars with this antitypical Assyria, he begins her downfall. That was page 17 of 1TG 24. Now going on now, 14 tract, pages 52 and 53 says this: though Nahum predicts the fall of Assyria in connection with he that dashes in pieces, it does not say that he that dashes in pieces is himself to finish off Assyria, as one would naturally be inclined to conclude. After Nahum 2:5, there is no more mention of him that dashes in pieces, showing that he is out of the way. Add to this fact that the truth that the war has split the whole world, practically all nations and peoples, into opposing chips of all sizes, and we have solid anchors to the proof that World War II is Nahum's war, and that Hitler is the one whom inspiration entitled, he that dashes in pieces. Indeed, he divided the nations and peoples so that, so far, no one has been able to weld them together. Clear it is then, brothers and sisters, we see why it is that God goes back to World War II. He wants to lay the background or the foundation for the beginning of what will be Assyria's fall. Clear it is. Nahum is describing what was to take place in World War II and in what we generally as a society would call World War III, but according to prophecy it would be the continuation of World War II. In other words, World War II is mentioned because it was the sign of the future fall of Assyria. Not that she literally began to fall then in that war, that is, in World War II. No, because the Allies won World War II. The war was not won for the good of Great Britain, though. Since World War II, the United States has become the modern Nineveh, if you will, the capital city, the leader of Assyria. Another reason is this, that World War II prepared the way for the Cold War and the greatest of all battles that is still yet to be fought. We cannot understand the present or the future without first understanding the past, especially World War II. There is still yet another point to consider. Everything was ready during the time of World War II. That is to say that the sealing of the 144,000, the complete fall of Assyria, and Ezekiel 9 and the deliverance of God's people all could have taken place then. But God's people were not ready. We were not ready. Listen to these inspired statements that prove this very point. 14 track, page 24 says, if the present world war is the one predicted by Nahum, and if the sealing or marking of the servants of God is to be completed without the angels having again to tighten their hold on the winds, then the time to restore the excellency of Jacob and of Israel is at hand. That's 14 track, page 24. Remember that this track was written during the war. So it means it could have happened back then. Things could have been ready. Now let us take a look at 12 Symbolic Code number 1, page 24, which was also written about the same time. From all appearances, it looks as though we are very, very close to the fulfillment of these prophecies. Only one thing hinders it, and that is that we have not finished our work. Had we taken the message of warning to the church, this could all have been finished by now, for the nations are all ready. God will hold it until we get our work done. Another thing that is certain is that it is for our good whatever happens and whoever wins, if we are followers of God in spirit and in truth. That was 12 Symbolic Code 1, page 24. Everything is ready, brothers and sisters. The nations are ready. God is ready. He's just waiting on us. There's a lesson there for us, indeed, something for us to think about. Now, with all this in mind, we can continue almost verse by verse through Nahum chapter 1. So now we can take a look at Nahum chapter 1, verses 2 through 9. Now, we will not have an opportunity or the time to read it, but we can glance it through. And if you were to just glance these verses over, you will see that it speaks about God's power. It speaks about His glory. It speaks about His strength and what He's going to do to sin and to sinners. So what He promises to do with Nineveh, what He promises to do in judging modern Assyria, He's going to finally accomplish with all of sin and sinners. And that's why verse 9 ends up by saying, affliction shall not rise up the second time. In other words, sin will not come back again. So with this thought, we can go to verse 10. Nahum chapter 1, verse 10. For while they be folden together as thorns, and while they are drunken as drunkards, they shall be devoured as stubble fully dry. That was verse 10 of Nahum chapter 1. The expression here, folden together as thorns, means that Assyria will be allied with other strong nations. You can find that, by the way, in 14 tract, pages 7 and 8, and also page 29. So 14 tract, 7 and 8, and page 29 tell us the expression folden together as thorns would mean allied with other strong nations. Of course, that would seem quite clear from the meaning, from the text. Folden together as thorns means coming together, locking together, sharing the strength and companionship of another nation or other nations. During World War II, it was the Allies, including the United States, who came together. Today, we would say the United Nations. Do you remember the Iraq-Kuwait War? Do you remember how the nations came together to fight Saddam Hussein? That was an example of being folded together as thorns. And so it will be in the future, just before her fall. We studied Isaiah 8 earlier, and we saw that just around the time of this upcoming great war, Assyria will form a confederacy, an alliance, a coming together with all the nations of the West, or all the nations who share her way of life. So just as the West got together in World War II to fight Hitler, so in this upcoming war, the West will do it again, but obviously on a grander scale, a much grander scale. The expression drunk as drunkards would indicate that Assyria is intoxicated with her own ideas, but not God's. In fact, the Bible says that this counselor, there's a wicked counselor who will give them this false ideas. That's found in verse 11. We'll come back to that in just a minute or so. But being drunk as drunkards here would indicate that Assyria is intoxicated with her own ideas, but not God's. Wine in the Bible, as you know, is used in the negative. When used in the negative, is a symbol of false doctrines or false ideas. For example, Testimonies to Ministers, page 61 says that. Call Porter Ministry, page 48, has references about wine being a symbol of false teachings or false ideas. And there are other passages or other texts that we could talk about. But the Bible is saying that although Assyria ally herself with the other nations of the West, she will be devoured like dry grass, stubble that is fully dry. That means it's very dry. And we know that what happens when you light a match in very dry grass, we all know what happens there. Although in World War II they did have a sort of confederacy or alliance, Assyria did not lose the war. In fact, she won the war. Barely, but she won. So this verse has a more direct application to our time, the greatest of all wars, the time when the war will be fought in Palestine, what the world would call the continuation of World War III. But we know from God's perspective it is the continuation of World War II. So then very definitely, most clearly, there will be a confederacy. There will be an alliance. And in that alliance, there will be a wicked counselor, because verse 11 tells us this. Verse 11, there is one come out of thee that imagineth evil against the Lord, a wicked counselor. Who is this wicked counselor? In World War II, we cannot say precisely who that was, because inspiration has not told us. Many may guess one person or another. But the Bible makes it plain that there will be a wicked counselor who will influence this future confederacy. In fact, it is he who will cause the West to become drunk. So some very influential person will be responsible for advising the West in its efforts to confederate and win the war. We cannot say precisely, again, who that person is now. Could it be the President of the United States, the United Nations Secretary General, or the U.S. Secretary of State? Well, we just don't know. We don't know. We haven't been told. But the point is, there will be one. The Bible tells us there will be a wicked counselor. Now, verses 12 through 14. Verses 12 through 14 says, Thus saith the Lord, though they be quiet and likewise many, yet thus shall they be cut down when he shall pass through. Though I have afflicted thee, I will afflict thee no more. For now will I break his yoke from off thee, and will burst thy bonds in sunder. Now verse 14. And the Lord hath given a commandment concerning thee, that no more of thy name be sown. Out of the house of thy gods will I cut off the graven image, and the molten image. I will make thy grave, for thou art vile. Inspiration explains these verses in 14 track, that is the War News Forecast, pages 17 and 18. 14 tract, pages 17 and 18. Listen keenly, because this is somewhat involved, but listen very keenly to the explanation that inspiration has given us. This person, thee, whom the Lord has already chastened, obviously cannot be the Assyrian king or nation aforementioned, because the Lord is delivering this one while he is beating the Assyrians to their knees at the hands of him that dasheth in pieces. Just who this third character, thee, here introduced may be, is immediately established by Isaiah in his correlative prophecy concerning this same Assyria. Now, going on to the bottom of page 17, he explains further by quoting Isaiah 10, verse 27. That's the correlative prophecy that he's here referring to. Again, identifying who is the thee that is having the yoke removed, in other words. And it shall come to pass in that day, declares the prophet, that his, that is Assyria's, burden shall be taken away from off thy, Judah's, shoulder, and his yoke from off thy neck, and the yoke shall be destroyed because of the anointing. Isaiah 10, verse 27. Who is the person that is having the yoke removed? It is God's people. That's the point. While he's beating down Assyria, in other words, he will be delivering God's people by removing the yoke. Assyrian yoke. Remember, we talked about that in our last study. Continuing on now to page 18, immediately we see that in the revealing light of this scripture, the one thee, who, in both cases, is set free in the time of Assyria's fall, proves to be the church Judah, liberated from Gentile or Assyrian rule. Conclusively, therefore, Isaiah clarifies Nahum's prophecy as referring to the church's liberation from the last day Assyrian yoke. We can say amen to that. You see that Nahum and Isaiah and all of the prophets all blend together to give us a clear picture of what God is trying to tell us. Going on now on page 18, the fact, though, that the church, as Nahum says, is not only to be relieved from affliction and freed from bondage, but is also to be sentenced to death. That's verse 14, we read that. Nahum 1:14. Do you remember what it says there? Let's just review that. Nahum 1:14. And the Lord hath given a commandment concerning thee, that no more of thy name be sown. Out of the house of thy gods will I cut off the graven image and the molten image. I will make thy grave, for thou art vile. So on one hand, Assyria is being beaten down, and Assyria's yoke is being taken away from his people. But now on the other hand, we have a sentence of death being pronounced upon another group. Who is this group? The Bible says, thou art vile. Now, the prophet here says this creates a paradox. Inspiration, however, continue on now in page 18. Inspiration, however, quickly clears it again through Isaiah. Speaking of the church, he declares, "And ye shall leave your name for a curse unto my chosen, for the Lord God shall slay thee, and call his servants by another name." That's Isaiah 65, verse 15. Now, inspiration comments further. "Plainly, therefore, in the time when Assyria crumbles, the Lord is to perform a dual work among his professed people, some of whom will be made free because of their faithfulness, and some of whom will be slain because of their wickedness. The delivered ones will then be called by another name." Clearly, therefore, plainly then, God is telling us that he's to beat down Assyria, but while beating down Assyria, he will purify the church. He will remove the unconverted, the unfaithful, and then, at the other hand, deliver the righteous, deliver the 144,000. That's the lesson that God is trying to get across to us. So we know that in this upcoming war, yes, Assyria will lose, but God's true people will be delivered. And he will remove from the church the unconverted, the tares. Now we come to verse 15. Verse 15 of Nahum chapter 1. "Behold upon the mountains the feet of him that bringeth good tidings, that publisheth peace. O Judah, keep thy solemn feast, perform thy vows, for the wicked shall no more pass through thee, he is utterly cut off." 14 track pages 22 and also page 19 says this about this particular verse. Now remember what the verse says. "Behold upon the mountains the feet of him that bringeth good tidings, that publisheth peace. O Judah, keep thy solemn feasts, perform thy vows." Why? Why? "Because the wicked shall no more pass through thee. He is utterly cut off." Now keep that in mind. Again, 14 track, War News Forecast, pages 22 and page 19. It says, "Here in prophetic utterance is not only a promise to purify the church when modern Assyria is being crushed, but also a suggestive statement as to what constitutes meat in due season for men today, and as to what movement they are to enlist in if they would make sure of salvation. They are enjoined to fix their vision upon the feet of him who brings good tidings," message from the Lord, "who publishes peace," the peace of Christ's kingdom, "and who declares that while the powers of earth are engulfed in a gigantic war, the wicked in the church shall be cut off, no more to pass through her." Now this text makes it very plain what we have just said, that it is while God is beating down Assyria that the church is to be purified. Again, here in prophetic utterance is not only a promise to purify the church when modern Assyria is being crushed, but also a suggestive statement as to what constitutes the message, the meat in due season for God's people today. In other words, then, brothers and sisters, again, God's church will be purified in the midst of a gigantic war. While God is beating down Assyria, he will also be purifying his remnant church today. That's what verse 15 is actually saying. "Behold upon the mountains the feet of him that bringeth good tidings, that publishes peace," and says, "Keep your solemn feast, O Judah, perform thy vows." Why? Because the wicked is not going to pass through the church. He will be cut off. He will be removed. This is all in the context of Nahum chapter 1, verses 10 through 15, describing the war that is soon to come. Now we go to 14 track, page 19. 14 tract, page 19 says, "Very obviously then, the penitent Laodiceans are separated from the impenitent ones during Assyria's fall, and then are liberated from her rule." Again, very obviously, the penitent Laodiceans are separated from the impenitent ones during Assyria's fall, and then are liberated from her rule. Again, just re-emphasizing the point that God is trying to get across here. Now, let's take a look at 1 TG Volume 1, number 24, page 12. And listen to what it says. "So it is that while Nahum predicts liberation and peace for God's faithful people. He predicts disaster and humiliation for antitypical Assyria, the power which they serve, and for the wicked in the church. That was 1 TG 24, page 12. Also, page 13, 1 TG 24, page 13 says, here the prophet predicts that Assyria's capital city will be emptied and her palace dissolved. Clearly then, the kingdom of Judah is to be set up in the time of war and turmoil. The kingdom of Judah is to be set up in the time of war and turmoil. That was 1 TG 24, page 13. Clear enough, brothers and sisters. Once again, we see that the upcoming war will bring disaster for the West, but it will bring deliverance for God's true people. The question is, are we ready? Are we getting ready for these momentous events that are soon to take place in the world and in the church? With all of this in mind now of chapter 1 and the first part of chapter 2, we can see clearly that World War II was the type or the backdrop of what's going to happen in the future. And now we also can look at the fact as well that God has a great plan, and that he loves us so much that he has given us that plan so that we might be ready, so that we might be prepared for what is soon to take place in the world to come. Now, the rest of Nahum chapter 2 and chapter 3, you will notice at a glance. We will not have time to read it all, but if you were to look through the rest of it, it describes what's going to happen to Nineveh. That is Assyria. What's going to happen, and that is, she will fall. She will fall. For example, if we were to take a look at verses 6 and 7 and 8 and 9, just to get an idea. Inspiration does not give us a great deal of detail on these verses, but it does give us some ideas, some key thoughts that we can focus on. For example, verse 6 says, the gates of the rivers shall be opened, and the palace shall be dissolved. Verse 7, and Huzzah shall be led away captive. She shall be brought up, and her maids shall lead her as with the voice of doves, tabering upon her breast. But Nineveh is of old like a pool of water. Yet they shall flee away. Stand, stand, shall they cry, but none shall look back. Verse 9, take ye the spoil of silver, take the spoil of gold, for there is none end of the store which glory out of all the pleasant furniture. Verse 10, she is empty and void and waste, and the heart melteth, and the knees smite together, and much pain is in all loins, and the faces of them all gather blackness. Where is the dwelling of the lions, and the feeding place of the young lions, where the lion, even the old lion, walked, and the lions whelp, and none made them afraid? Do we get the picture here? Do we get the lesson? 14 tract, pages 13 and 14, gives us a brief description of this particular verse, or these verses in general. 14 tract, pages 13 and 14. Does not make a lot of commentary, but there are a few small or short comments that would give us a clue as to what the Lord here is talking about. 14 tract, pages 13 and 14. In reading the tract, though, we'll need to go back to verses 10 through 13. And as we read it, we will read Inspiration's comments, again found on pages 13 and 14. It says, she is empty and void and waste, and the heart melteth, and the knees smite together, and much pain is in all loins, and the faces of them all gather blackness. Where is the dwelling of the lions? And Inspiration adds, the king's palaces. And the feeding place of the young lions, the dominion of his princes. Inspiration says, where the lion, even the old lion, that is the head king, walked, and the lions whelp, the king's sons, and none made them afraid. The lion did tear in pieces enough for his whelps, and strangled for his lionesses, or queens, and filled his holes with prey, and his dens, or treasuries, with ravin, or, that is, riches. Now we come to the last verse, that's verse 13. Behold, I am against thee, saith the Lord of hosts. I will burn her chariots in smoke, and the sword shall devour thy young lions, and I will cut off thy prey from the earth, and the voice of thy messengers shall no more be heard. That's talking about the fall of Assyria. So then we get a general idea of what happens after verse 5. Now, verse 5 speaks about the fall of Hitler, but verses 6 through 13 now describe clearly here what's going to happen to Assyria. Now, obviously, we stand between verses 5 and the rest of Nahum. Chapter 2, verse 5, and the rest of Nahum. We are right in between those verses prophetically. Assyria has not yet fallen, but she will, according to the Bible. Chapter 3 also continues to tell us about the fall of Assyria. You can also find some small commentary or some short commentary there in 14 tract, pages 14 and 15. Just some very brief comments about the text. The text, of course, is almost self-explanatory. For example, let us look at just a few verses of chapter 3. Woe to the bloody city! It is all full of lies and robbery. The prey departeth not, the noise of a whip, the noise of the rattling of the wheels, of the prancing horses, of the jumping chariots. The horsemen lifteth up both the bright sword and the glittering spear, and there is a multitude of slain, and a great number of carcasses. And there is none end of their corpse. They stumble upon their corpse. This is very, very vivid indeed, very dramatic, but it's very true and very real. A very vivid description of what's going to take place in the battlefield with Assyria when she falls in this war. It is a terrible thing to think about, but it's true, brothers and sisters. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. For example, look in verse 5. Behold, I am against thee, saith the Lord of hosts. I will discover thy skirts upon thy face, and I will shew the nations thy nakedness, and the kingdoms thy shame. God is promising to embarrass and to punish Assyria, America and her allies, because she has been against the Lord. She has not followed the ways of the Lord. Strong language indeed, very much so. But it's true. Again, it does not give us any joy to speak about these things, but yet that is what God says, and we must declare it because God says it. And we have to do our part to get ready, to become prepared for this great and a dreadful day. There are so many other verses we could read here in this chapter, but just one or two more that may give us a little bit of the idea of how dreadful and how terrible that day is going to be. Verse 7, and it shall come to pass that all they that look upon thee shall flee from thee, and say, Nineveh is laid waste. Who will bemoan her? When shall I seek comforters for thee? Art thou better than Populus? No, that was situate among the rivers that had the waters round about it, whose rampart was the sea, and her wall was from the sea. And there's, again, so many other things mentioned. Verse 11, thou also shalt be drunken, thou shalt be hid, thou also shalt seek strength because of the enemy. All thy strongholds shall be like fig trees with first-ripe figs. If they be shaken, they shall even fall into the mouth of the eater. The remainder of Nahum chapter 3, in fact, the entire book of Nahum, deals with the fall of Assyria, describing things as we have just read, telling how dreadful and how fearful her punishment is going to be because she has turned her back upon the Lord. Oh, brothers and sisters, this is quite sobering, but this is what the Lord is going to do. Our responsibility, again, is to be ready, is to be prepared for the great and dreadful time that is coming upon this world and upon our church and upon the world. Oh, may God help us that we will take these matters to heart and that we will become ready, that we will become wholly the Lord's and fully His in every circumstance, in all things. That is what we must strive for. That is what we must work for. By His grace and through His power, we can, and we must be ready, and we must be prepared. Perhaps now you're wondering, what prepares Assyria for her future confederacy and her downfall? And who will she fight against? Who will be her antagonist, in other words? in this upcoming war, we know that she will have to have an antagonist. We know that Assyria will fall in this war. We will look at Assyria's fall a little bit later on. We'll see how she will fall as we progress into our study, into our subject. But for right now, we do want to answer the questions. What will prepare her for her future confederacy and her fall? And who will she fight against? Who will be her antagonist in this upcoming great war? In order to answer these questions, we will have to look at what took place after World War II. What changed the world? What transpired after World War II that could or would bring about another world war? We're given a glimpse of this in tract number 14, and we'd like to begin with page 17. We've read part of this before, but we'll need to go back and analyze just a few lines of tract number 14, the War News Forecast. The middle paragraph, commenting on verses 12 and 13. Inspiration says this: "This person, thee, whom the Lord has already chastened, obviously cannot be the Assyrian king or nation aforementioned, because the Lord is delivering this one while he's beating the Assyrians to their knees at the hands of him that dasheth in pieces." One could get the impression from this statement that Hitler, the he that dashes in pieces, was the one to cause Assyria to fall. Now remember that this particular tract was written during World War II, while the war was still going on. The outcome was not yet known, and the entire understanding of Nahum had not yet been given. So then, one may have gotten the impression, and perhaps maybe even some of the believers at that time may have thought, that Hitler may have been the one that God would use to beat down Assyria, beat down the West. This can be further proven by looking at Answer Book number 5, pages 31 and 32. Answer Book number 5, pages 31 and 32. There's a question there, a question. The question is, he that dashes in pieces, as I see it after reading tract number 14, War News Forecast, is Hitler. But how can this be when he's now getting the worst of it and the Allies are winning the war? That's a good question, illustrating what we were just talking about, what we were just looking at there in tract number 14, page 17. So during the war now, apparently it appeared, or at least many expected, that Hitler would be the one to win the war, and Assyria would lose. But listen to Inspiration's answer. The tract does not by name identify the one who dasheth in pieces. Any conclusions, therefore, that may be deduced from one's analysis of its contents can be only inferential and therefore tentative. From current developments in the European theater of war, it does look as though Hitler is doomed. Despite this appearance, however, Nahum's prophecy analytically fits him, although it is possible that someone else may yet come forth to carry the prediction to fulfillment. And if during this war the prophecy does not meet its entire fulfillment, then it must be that the sealing of the saints is yet incomplete, the work of the message unfinished, the first fruits not ready to stand with the Lamb on Mount Zion. This seems to be the only hindrance. In other words, God's people were not ready. The sealing was not yet over because we had not made ourselves ready. And so the prophecy could not come to its fruition at that time in World War II. So God then had to fulfill his prophecy of the fall of Assyria later on. And so he knew that. He knew that we would not be ready, and so then he had it written in the Bible. It's in the book of Nahum. We actually covered it already. And it is expounded upon as we go to tract number 14, pages 51 to 54. Now, tract number 14, pages 51 to 54, is what is referred to as the supplement. It was written after World War II. We would like to begin with page 51 at the bottom. It says the trend of World War II leaves no doubt that it is the one foretold by the prophet Nahum. This is made manifest by several facts. Inspiration makes clear that Nahum's war is fought in the time the chariots rage in the streets, while they jostle one against another in the broadways, while they seem like torches and run like lightnings in our day. The prophet, moreover, states that after the one that dashes in pieces comes up before Assyria's face, then it is that Assyria makes her loins strong, fortifies her power mightily, which, as the whole world knows, is just what took place when Hitler came against the Allies. So what he's doing basically is reaffirming that everything that had been said was actually correct. He goes on, the Allies being unprepared to fight Hitler when he started dashing in pieces, they necessarily fortified their power mightily after the war began. All these facts prove that World War II is the war prophesied by Nahum, and that Hitler is the one that dasheth in pieces. Now at the bottom of page 52, though Nahum predicts the fall of Assyria in connection with he that dasheth in pieces, it does not say that he that dashes in pieces is himself to finish off Assyria, as one would naturally be inclined to conclude. It is now seen, though, that he that dashes in pieces himself was only to break or cause to be broken in pieces, not only the allied nations, but his own nation too. In fact, the prophecy says that his worthies, the worthies of the one that dashes in pieces, were not to win, but that they were to stumble in their walk and stumble while on their march to victory. Going on now to page 53, we're near the bottom of page 53. He says, after Nahum 2:5, there is no more mention of him that dasheth in pieces, showing that he is out of the way. Add to this fact that the truth that the war has split the whole world, practically all nations and peoples, into opposing chips of all sizes, and we have solid anchors to the proof that World War II is Nahum's war, and that Hitler is the one whom inspiration entitled, he that dasheth in pieces. Indeed, he divided the nations and peoples so that so far no one has been able to weld them together again. This is a very important point to keep in mind in preparation for what's going to happen in the next war, and actually what is even going on today, why the world is the way that it is today. Going on now to page 54, a 14 tract. It says, furthermore, by the outcome of the war, England actually has not won. Yes, she has lost far beyond what she would have lost had she let Hitler have what he wanted in the first place, only a part of Poland. Now, here's the key point. Then, too, the defeat of Japan and of Germany has by no means ended the war. It has only deepened the international deadly wound. Thus, the possibilities of fulfilling every phase of truth contained in tract number 14 are now brighter than before. As far as inspiration is concerned, World War II has not ended. This in itself is evidence enough that the world now, during this period of international unrest such as it has never before had, unrest that is caused by every existing element, is to give birth to something. That's what inspiration is telling us. As a result of World War II, the world was split up into many chips and sizes and cracks, and as a result of this, unrest is everywhere. That's why we have problems now in the Middle East. That's why there are problems in the terrorism. That's why there are problems in so many parts of the world today. It is as a result of the outcome of World War II. We will not say every small problem is a result of that, but you will find or trace much of the world's ills today back to the end result of World War II. So, World War II, as far as God is concerned, is not actually over. Time to Greetings, Volume 2, number 41, pages 15 and 16 tell us why the war is not actually over and what has come up as a result of World War II. At least one of the key things. Moreover, there has been no official declaration as yet that the war is over. That is speaking about World War II. No complete settlement with the powers which fought in the war has yet been reached. anyone can see that the world is fast getting ready to resume the war with a mightier and final blow if possible. Anyone can see, too, that the war was not won for the good of Great Britain but for Russia, and that following the cessation of hostilities, conditions have caused the world to consolidate into two great and hostile blocks, the Western and the Eastern blocks. Let's repeat that. Notice, the Western and the Eastern blocks. The world has consolidated into two great blocks, the East and the West. Not to mention, he says, the wars and rumors of wars all around us. This happened because Great Britain allied with atheistic Russia, a government that is against God and his church. Thus, Great Britain put greater trust in God's enemy than in God himself. And that is why the war is yet to be fought. That's right, friends. Brothers and sisters, as a result of World War II, one very important factor came up, and that is communism. The world was divided into two great blocks, the East and the Western blocks.